This is what children are currently experiencing in our schools, and this is what I believe they need to experience instead. You see, I believe that the education system needs some rewilding. But what exactly do I mean by that? The term implies that we humans are no longer wild. So, what are we? I'm a really big fan of the work of Daniel Vitalis and Arthur Haynes. They are pretty well known in the rewilding community, so I give full credit to them when I talk about what we are now as human beings. It was first from them that I learned this idea of human domestication, that we are no longer wild like our hunter-gatherer ancestors, but instead we are more tame, more fragile, we are more domesticated. You see, when humans began domesticating plants and animals about 10,000 years ago, we also began domesticating ourselves from our wild hunter-gatherer ancestors. Domesticated means of the home or house, which I feel is very appropriate for describing humans today because we spend a large amount of time indoors, either working or just inside of our houses. And as a consequence, we have lost touch with the lifeway of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. And this was a lifestyle that was very healthful. It was one of community, connection, wild food, movement, nature connection. And unfortunately, losing touch with this lifeway has had major consequences. We have essentially become divorced from nature. We have committed ecocide in the name of progress, and our health has been declining rapidly as a result. Loneliness, depression, and suicide are all more prevalent today. Now, while hunter-gatherer life wasn't perfect or a utopia by any means, we can see through the anthropological research that it was a more healthful way of living, and it yielded a much better quality of life. But rewilding is not about going back in time to our hunter-gatherer days. It's just not realistic, and nor is it about getting rid of all of the aspects of modern living. So what is it? This is how I would define rewilding: seeking to implement the wisdom of ancestral lifeways in our modern lives. And when I say ancestral lifeways, I mean the lifeways of people who lived pre-agriculture. So we have briefly touched on what rewilding is, but why is it important that we implement it into our schools? Why is it not something that we can just do with our families as a hobby? Well, reason number one is that schools are not congruent with children's biological learning norms. And I will explain what I mean by this. In order to do so, we need to briefly go over the history of schools. So schools emerged only in the last 5,000 years or so, and when we consider that we modern Homo sapiens have been on the earth for around 200,000 years, that is not that long. We have only had schools for literally 1/40th of our existence as modern Homo sapiens. And even more recently, compulsory public education didn't become widespread until the early 1900s. So this means that schools are a product of human domestication, which begs the question, what did children do before schools for the tens of thousands of years before they emerged in the agricultural revolution? How did children learn? Can you take a guess? Children mostly played, and they directed their own learning through play. This was the means by which they learned the skills that they needed to become thriving, functioning adults in their communities. They no doubt had mentors, but by and large, they were learning through their play and curiosity in a self-directed way. So what happened? Why did agriculture kind of spur on schools? Well, with agriculture requiring more labor, children began helping out around the house. They were expected to help out and be obedient to their parents or their masters. And then, as time went on, monotheistic religions emerged, and children began being educated by church clergy, and the focus was learning how to gain salvation and how to be obedient. Eventually, the state took control of children's education, and from there the focus and agenda of education shifted. But largely it remained a system where adults remained the ones in charge, telling the children what to do and expecting obedience from them. A lot of this information I learned from Dr. Peter Gray in his book Free to Learn, which I highly recommend, so I will put a link down below in the description box for you. Okay, so if we look at how humans learned pre-domestication as opposed to how they learned after domestication, the difference is crystal clear. Learning went from being playful and self-directed, which is fun, joyful, and intrinsically motivated, to being expected to listen to adults for 7 hours a day, which is often monotonous, boring, and extrinsically motivated, meaning that children are only motivated to do what they are told to do because there is some sort of reward or they get the praise and approval of the teacher. In short, children's biological norm is to learn through play. And unfortunately, in schools, play is seen as a break from learning. And I really just think that this is a travesty because the instinct to play is so strong in children and it often just gets stifled. And play is really important for healthy development in order to develop the skills needed to be functioning, capable, thriving adults someday. So we need to rewild education so that children can live out their biological norm and consequently be healthier and happier. Reason number 2, schools perpetuate the negative outcomes of domestication. Schools are institutions that emerged in our agricultural days, in our domesticated days. If we don't change anything in our public schools, it just makes sense that domestication is just going to continue. Let me just provide you with one example because this could be a whole video in and of itself. Most children going through the public education system will continue this pattern of sedentary living that has contributed to our deteriorating health. As this one article puts it, the majority of our evolution has been spent as nomadic hunter-gatherer ancestors where we walked for 6 to 9 miles a day, we moved around a lot. Our bodies and behaviors are adapted to this lifestyle. And I think this probably explains why a lot of kids struggle with school, or at least with some aspect of school, whether it be not being able to move around a lot, or not being able to freely choose what it is that they want to do. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, because they did move around a lot, the children had ample time to move as well. They lived outdoors, they had more space. Meanwhile, our children are lucky if they get 2 to 3 recesses per day. And while this might seem generous, like, oh, go us, we are letting our kids play outside for 2 to 3 times a day, it's still not in alignment with our biology because we are meant to move consistently throughout the day, not just in spikes. So what if children's movement in schools was rewilded? What if they were able to choose for themselves how often they wanted to move, or how they wanted to sit on the carpet, for example, during carpet time? Because heaven forbid someone doesn't sit crisscross applesauce. If children were able to choose how much they moved during a school day, whether it be indoors or outdoors, I really do think that we would see kids move more than they currently are. And it just goes without saying, more movement would equal healthier children. So we went over how schools do not really allow children to live out their biological norm, and they also do perpetuate the negative sides of domestication. And I think this is just evident if you look at the last 100 years that compulsory education system has been in place. I think really we've just been declining as far as our health is concerned. But we can't just get rid of schools, so that leads me to reason number 3, and that is that schools are an integral part of how our society functions. Remember that rewilding is about applying the wisdom of our ancestors to our modern context. And our modern context today is that most parents have to work because of inflation. They need to both be able to work during the day, and consequently they need somewhere for their child to go. So why don't we rewild our schools so that children have the best possible environment to be taken care of while their parents are working? I really do believe that we need to meet the situation and people where they're at. Reason number 4, children are the leaders of tomorrow. If we want to see real lasting change in our societies as far as our health is concerned, when it comes to healing our relationship with the natural world, when it comes to improving our health and the health of the planet, I really do believe that we need to invest in our children and that we need to focus on their education and improving it. You see, if we implemented the wisdom of our hunter-gatherer ancestors into the schools, we would see children who are interacting more with the natural world, developing a relationship with it, and we would see children who have time to play and direct their own learning. You see, I believe it is this type of learning that our children need. They need this type of learning to thrive, to be healthy, to grow up into adults who are creative, who are resilient, who are problem solvers. These are the kinds of human beings that we want to bring forth into the world. For many years, education has meant listening to the instructions of adults all day and being obedient. Looking to the future, getting an education needs to be about learning the skills required to thrive as an adult throughout life. And this is accomplished by interacting with a rich environment through playful curiosity and self-directed learning. In future videos, I will be going over ways in which I think that we could implement rewilding into our schools, but I do believe that the first step is to just start talking about it. So I really want to hear from you. If you could leave me a comment down below letting me know how you think we could rewild schools. And really get creative, just think of anything. It doesn't even have to sound realistic, just think of ways in which we could rewild our schools, because if we don't start talking about it, it will never happen in any degree. And make sure to subscribe to my channel so that we can continue this dialogue. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.